All right, the live stream has started, although I have to take a moment and pause the playback, which it always starts. I wish I knew how to stop it from mirroring it so I don't have to begin my videos with this random distraction.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to the Great Wisdom Debate of 2024. I appreciate Tom taking up the challenge. So what I'd like to do is we have a format that we've used modeled on Truth Bowl from the applied ethics community, where the goal is not to win the debate. The goal is to demonstrate deep understanding of the other person's position. And so what I'd like to do is, Tom, is invite you to present first for like 10 minutes or so. And then the goal is for Ernest and I to kind of summarize what you've said in a way that you feel deeply heard and understood to make sure we get the point of what you're trying to say. And then we can ask questions about things that we disagree with or find confusing. And you have time to respond to that. And then hopefully, 20, 30 minutes, and then we swap. And then I can present my point of view on wisdom, and you guys do the same thing. And then Ernest, if he feels like it, can declare a winner, or we can just all have a big group hug and be happy. We'll see. Sound like a
Yeah.
plan?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So you have the floor.
Ernest, have you got new glasses, Ernest?
Oh, me. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I thought
yes.
so.
I thought you looked a little extra intellectual today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I call you
get
Mr.
my
Moderator. Slide up. Yeah, I'll give you 15 minutes on the clock and just go for it. And
okay. Let's see. First, I got to get my shared stuff up. I think I'll use that, and then keynote and okay and play, and now you have my slides, right? It says Wisdom Project.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, good. So let's see. Don't tell me it's going to be a nasty guy. Okay. Well, first, being a fanatic on clear communication, I thought defining the term and agreeing on the definition amongst us might be good, but as you weren't there for agreement, I looked up some definitions anyway. And let's see, we put my own glasses on, and using Perplexity or something like that. But all the definitions seemed pretty reasonable. We'll just take a look at the first one: the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. Okay. So, and we've got lots of other choices here, and we won't worry too much about it. We just establish the fact that there are many definitions of wisdom, and we have not agreed on one to discuss this evening, but we could quibble about that later. I like to think, and I think there may be some debate about it, that wisdom is a subset of knowledge. Here we have symbolically various classes of knowledge. It gets stored in our brain or maybe outside of our brain and accessible when we want it. And we distill from this some things that allow us to survive and not immediately get wiped out. And those are actions based on the knowledge of what doesn't get you killed and does maybe help sustain you. So they'll call that wise action, more or less. Here is a pyramid I had in my Ken book or my knowledge book, which I hope you either have a copy of, or if you don't, you'll ask me for it. But this is my concept in language, number 686. And if you like, this is my definition of knowledge, not wisdom. And so facts, information, and skills accessible by system stakeholder by any means for the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. So it's the basis for understanding. So here's knowledge in this tree, and here's little wisdom on the top of it. Okay. In the Ken book, Knowledge Education, Eduneering, I speculated that knowledge has many qualities. And if you look through this list, like the accuracy of knowledge or the longevity of knowledge or the privacy of knowledge, you can readily agree that, yeah, a lot of those things do apply to knowledge. And so I'll just make a broad statement. Knowledge has a number, a non-trivial number of qualities, and these determine how good that knowledge is for specific purposes and specific stakeholders. And now we're really talking language, way of thinking about things. So enlarged view, sorry, I didn't go to it a little bit earlier, of the attributes. And I'm not saying this is a finite set or this is the right set. I'm just saying it's a big and plausible set. And it wouldn't surprise me if the set was very much larger. I found that if you ask AI to give you almost any number of qualities of things, it will give you almost any number. We were trying to do the qualities of happiness the other day, and it refused to go above 1,250 qualities of happiness, because it wasn't trained in anymore. Not that there weren't anymore. Thought that was kind of cute. So asking my favorite AI tool to give me some objectives for wisdom for an IT consultant. So that's sort of my trade. And here's the name, which is all you really have to worry about. And here's the type, wisdom objective for IT. The ambition level is the bullshit level, the nice sounding words level that are full of ambiguities. So to move in the direction of something clearer, we say all objectives are, or value objectives anyway, are variables. Therefore, they can be quantified. Therefore, we can define a scale of measure. And how many different scales of measure are there for any one of these? Again, a very large number, and your favorite AI tool will oblige you with giving you 10 or 20 or 100 or whatever you want. Scale qualifiers are sort of the environment. You know, is it an IT person doing this to a large client in China, for example? And the meter and goal we needn't worry too much about, but this is like a way of getting something defined, and courtesy of Perplexity just asking. Let's see. Here's some more of these, but they're objectives not just for an IT consultant in general, but an IT consultant who wishes to invest in wisdom acquisition. So if you like a special situation, and here are just the names, but for example, continuous learning time, that kind of thing. So I then said, okay, in order to reach, one or more of these sets of objectives, what kind of strategies would you recommend to reach the quantified levels in the defined deadline for that exact scale of measure? And I get a list, which I know from experience that it has tried to fit reasonably, and that every one of these has a justification. In other words, the only justification is it fits the values, the goals, the objectives. But and I've asked it to tell me why it thought I should look at these strategies, which are defined there. And I have a new book out about risk management, which is called Risk. And I wrote, by the way, 10 books this summer. So probably about 4 or 5 of them since we talked last. Get your free copy anytime. Anyway, so these are the suggested ones. Then, of course, we want to know how good are these strategies for these objectives. And I asked it to rate them. And it gives a lot of nice, round, even numbers, not telling me very much. I think it really doesn't know what it's talking about, but it tries to look like it does anyway. But and anybody can manually go through these one number at a time and have a big argument with evidence. And in my impact estimation table, I like to request evidence and sources of evidence and check it. And I can do that with the AI system too, if I want, and it's pretty good at that. The problem we started with, if I recall, was what about the return on investment for wisdom? So long story short, I asked Perplexity to work that out for me, and I don't really care about the details here. It's more interesting that it tried to work out the return on investment. And, in my 10 minutes, I can't possibly go through this in detail, but you can if you want to. Just for fun, I said, could you, based on all these ideas, could you develop a course of 30 one-hour steps, like 30 1 hour a week or something like that for gaining wisdom? And I think it's nice that it suggested how we should learn to gain wisdom, and even fun that I've fallen in the habit of asking AI to, for example, design a series of course modules for the books I write. You'll find them in the books. Here are things like, for example, how many hours of these 30 do you need to reach your goal levels? And it makes some estimates, that are very roughly halfway through the goals, you get half of the wisdom, something like that. That's the end, and I used about 10 minutes. So I'll back off from sharing and release.
Stop screen share. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Hey!
Hey! Well, it's more like happiness than wisdom, but maybe they're correlated, maybe they're anti-correlated. I don't know.
Well, one of my greatest wisdoms after all these years as a speaker.
You're still screen sharing, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay.
We're seeing all your dirty laundry.
Share. Oh, stop share. Right. I'll say just jokingly, one of my greatest wisdoms as a consultant and speaker for decades is, for God's sake, end on time. No matter what.
Yes, I appreciate that. Okay, so Ernest, you want to take a stab at summarizing kind of what you saw as the point or key messages in Tom's presentation?
So what is wisdom? Do we have a definition? Did we put one? Did you present one?
Yes, I presented a set of them, which Perplexity gave to me, but then I chose one of them. Now, I can pull it up and quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Mind you.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So, definition of wisdom. Okay. Okay. So, okay, you have a suggestion there. In one of the slides, you say wisdom is a subject of knowledge. Is that correct?
Subset. Well, yeah, that's a fair debate. I've heard some people who absolutely reject that idea. But maybe there's another way of formulating it that's less contentious, like wisdom is built on a foundation of knowledge, is a better way of saying it.
So would you say that wisdom requires knowledge?
Yes, I would say absolutely. The idea of no knowledge and wisdom is, I can't compute it.
Right. Just as a possible clarification, if wisdom requires knowledge, what could that possibly imply that wisdom is a superset of knowledge? Or I guess I think this is like subclassing. The terminology can actually be very confusing in terms of language.
It's derived. It's based on knowledge that is accumulated. And so in a simple sense, you've selected some knowledge that works and you've gotten rid of some knowledge that doesn't work. And what does work is called wisdom. That's a gross simplification, but it shows the relationship of wisdom to knowledge. The idea of why wisdom means actually making choices or doing things or decisions in a wise way. So I can't imagine a thing called wisdom. Now, if you called it intuition, as in an animal or an amoeba, but that's not wisdom. That's built-in reflexes, stimuli. And calling that wisdom would be it's some of the same stuff. It helps us survive by making, or an animal survive by making wise decisions. But I don't think we call it wisdom. We call it intuition or something like that.
Because it's innate.
Interesting. So when you say knowledge, you actually mean explicit conscious knowledge rather than intuition?
Yes. Okay. I mean something you could put in a database and write down as a fact. That's what I'm thinking of when I think about it.
Interesting. Okay.
Continue.
Keep going. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a link to your slide so we can go browse that while we're talking?
Yes, of course. I'll send it right away.
Thank you.
Let's see. Mail.
Go ahead, Ernest.
Okay. So knowledge has a number of qualities. I understand that. But then in one slide you say, how does the IT consultant acquire wisdom? So I don't know if I see steps to acquiring wisdom. It's just experience is very important. So, I wouldn't say, hey, a consultant can, buy wisdom.
Be careful. That word experience, what you're doing is you're storing away your experiences in a form we call knowledge. I know what experience I had. So experience is a particular kind of knowledge. And we can have knowledge which is not experienced. It's somebody else's fact or experience, but it can be. So knowledge can consist of many things, including personal experience, but not only that.
Okay. I wouldn't agree with that, but I understand where you're coming from. Because, experiences to me is very personal or if computers are like people, then very systematized. I can't say that a computer learns experience or has experience. We're not there yet, but forget that. So Ernest's experience is different from my experience. If we read the same book.
But Ernie can share it with you and you can learn from it as much as your own. So it's not like you can derive nothing from his experience. On the contrary, if he shares it, you can make use of it. We do it all the time.
Well, we don't share the actual experience. We share what we learned from the experience. You can't, somebody hit Ernie in the stomach. You cannot, Ernie cannot give me, okay, I was hit, I couldn't breathe. He couldn't say it, but I could never experience it. So that experience is it belongs to
Right.
Ernie.
You might learn not to take away Tom's sandwich. So that's wisdom, like, or else he'll punch you in the stomach. I could share that knowledge, which I guess might be a sense of, maybe that's the sense in which you're talking about wisdom as knowledge that can be shared.
Yes. So yeah.
Maybe you can take 2 more minutes to wrap up, Ernest, and then I can make some comments. But
Tom, you said you used the word wisdoms. I don't know if that's okay. Like people, say water, they might say waters when if you ship to various places. So the waters of the Pacific or the waters of the Atlantic, they're different waters. So I guess, but to me it's more difficult to express wisdoms. I share some wisdoms because I don't see it as a thing that can be.
Yeah, my initial point was there are many possible definitions, and and so I gave a list. Yeah,
could you write down yours in the chat just so we have a precise statement of which one you actually used?
Yes, I can. Coming up, chat in.
Oh, you did it?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the whole presentation you're explaining how you use an AI thing to write this content. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so let me thank you, Ernest. If you'll let me make sure I see if I understand. So let me just repeat your definition here: the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. And key to your is that wisdom requires knowledge, and particularly in the idea that it requires explicit knowledge, if I can use that term, not just subconscious insight. And that explicit knowledge can be shared, and that wisdom can be given to other people in some sense. Am I tracking with you so far?
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, and it's I think you follow the same hierarchy of sort of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, or something similar to that. Boy, my handwriting is really atrocious. And it feels like a key part of wisdom is being able to choose wise goals and define wise goals.
Well, I would say actions. Choose wise actions. And choosing a goal is one action, but choosing a strategy is a different action.
When you say choose wise actions, I realize there's 2 possible meanings of that term.
Yes.
One is that sitting here in my chair, I can choose, like, I'm going to go and eat a healthy salad for lunch. I am choosing the wise action. And then there's when I'm actually sitting at the refrigerator and deciding what to grab. In the moment of action, I perform the wise behavior. And I'm not sure which sense of the word choosing you're using.
Well, it's a decision whether made early and idealistically or later and pragmatically. So you have to say, okay, what action did you choose theoretically as you were walking to the refrigerator? And then what did you really do when you opened the fridge and saw what was there?
Right.
Those are 2 different choices.
Right. And the question is when you say, does your definition of wisdom encompass both of those?
Oh gosh, you're asking me more than I've thought. Now, be aware that I didn't really settle on one single definition. I observed there are many, and we as a group didn't say, let's use this one and work on that one. So I picked just the first one for illustration. And but wisdom, as I understand it, will both help you make a theoretically correct decision, do what is healthy, and it will also help you make a narrower decision. I'm going to take the ice cream anyway, it won't hurt me, and I'll be happy.
Yes. Forgetting that I have a wedding in a week and it's going to burst my tuxedo.
Oh,
Not speaking from personal experience or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right. One thing that I liked was the actually the slide on the course. And what I liked most about it was I noticed this repetition of sort of study, apply, analyze, and practice.
Mhm.
I don't know if you noticed that about your AI generated course on training. But when I think of someone that I want to act wisely, that is usually the kind of preparation that I want them to have, right? It's not merely the acquisition of explicit knowledge. It is actually having participated in a feedback loop where they have learned how to act wisely in a given context. At least that's one of the vibes I got from your course. Did you? Yeah, you put it in the chat there. Is that would you agree with that, or is that something just that the AI thought?
Sorry to be quite honest. I was busy putting that in there. I didn't hear your question well enough. Could you repeat question, please?
Sure, no problem. Is that I actually like this idea. I mean, I didn't read it in detail either, but it looked to me that there was this repeated pattern of study, apply, analyze, develop, practice as the way to acquire wisdom. And that it was a practical experiential course, not merely a memorize these wise actions, these wise knowledge principles.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Was there anything else you were trying to say that we didn't get in our summary?
Not really, except this classical consultant's get out. It depends. So it depends on whether you're the consultant serving a client or a consultant seeking personal wisdom, etc. So you have to. There's no easy universal set of objectives for gaining wisdom or universal set of strategies. It depends. That's a main message from language and my way of thinking. We have to get more specific and not over generalize. That'll be more useful for the particular environment we've defined.
Yeah, so let me just repeat that back, because I think that's an important point. I actually agree with that distinction just for the purposes of simplifying the conversation. Some people use the term wise as in almost a teleological sense. Like this is, if you act wisely, it will result in the best possible world being created for everyone. And I've done that occasionally. But here I think we're talking more about instrumental wisdom. Is given a specific role in a particular context, wisdom is the ability to act wisely in there, not, changing the game and redefining the roles, in a more sort of activist sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good contextual role-based definition of wisdom. Okay. Yep. Anything else?
No, we're fine.
Okay, good. So let me, I just have a few, I don't really do slides. I have my diagram, which I may have shared before. I'm not sure whether we discussed it or whether this is a thing. Let me hide everything here and share my screen, because I'll bring up a couple different windows. Screen sharing failed to start. That's weird. That would really be a bummer in terms of the conversation.
Mine started, so it's not like nobody's starting. Maybe yeah. I have the chairmanship of the meeting accidentally.
No, I just messed up. So
okay,
that was me. Okay, good. So let me start with a definition. And right, I believe the point of wisdom is being able to act wisely and bringing about what I would consider an optimal, and I think let's use role, an optimal for everyone involved in this context. So like, it's not, it's, so there's a question of what wisdom is and what wisdom does. And I think you focus, I think in a lot of ways on the context of the more sort of the static sense of what wisdom is. As and I'm focusing in this context on the complementary and hopefully overlapping perspective, an operational definition of what wisdom does. but I did take your note there, is of accumulated, curated, explicit knowledge. And I think the main point I want to make is this diagram, which I think I've shared before. And the way that I would maybe reconcile our perspectives. Have I talked about this diagram before, Ernest? Do you remember this? Or should I walk through it again?
I don't remember.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. So this was the thing that I was working on for this month. It's been so long, I've totally lost context. I actually did my homework early this time for a change, so I totally forgot when I did it. So the idea is that you're in a context, you perceive things, stimulus using a particular schema, and that creates things like perceptions of color or objects or whatever. And then you classify those things using an ontology, your sense of what exists and what is real. And then that goes through, for lack of a better term, I call the right brain, so that generates a set of concepts, which are then filtered through my values to generate emotions, which are then filtered through my goals to make a decision, which I then act on based on the capabilities of my body, and that updates my context. And so the green loop is the primary one, where the first class loop of context, perception, conception, emotion, decision, and action. And so that's the first order loop of sort of what we call inference, right? I'm just inferring through a series of stages. And this is based on that AI model, XJEPA, that I may have talked about in a previous version. The second level loop is the idea that I can reflect on whether the circumstances achieved these goals that I had, whether my actions achieved the goals that I intended. And then I can update, and it's relatively easy to update sort of the high level goals. It's slightly harder to update the values, and much harder to update the ontology and the schema. At least that's in this model. And from my perspective, knowledge per se is primarily this box here of the ontology, the things that I think exist that are real and how they relate to one another. And there is enormous value in that, right? Knowing things and being able to communicate that. But that is what I would call maybe conceptual wisdom. It's the portion of wisdom that can be conceptualized and written down, articulated. And if people already share those same concepts, or can be trained and can be taught those concepts based on what they already know, then that wisdom is immediately useful and relevant. But the point of this system is that to actually act wisely requires a bunch of other things as well. One is the ability to perceive reality. Like, for example, my mom, when I was young, and I go back from college, she would get upset at me for leaving all my, I would shave and then the sink would be dirty with all these little beard hairs. And I couldn't understand why until I got reading glasses and realized that I could not see the thing that she was upset about. So knowing there's a problem and being able to perceive it, is a very different thing. And I often use the example of Japanese speakers with the letters R and L. Like, they just can't perceive it, even if they know intellectually that there's a difference. And then the second key piece is the right brain values that produce emotions. And that I can have all these concepts. If I do not produce the right emotional weight on those things, then I'm not going to act wisely, regardless of the amount of explicit knowledge I have. And then the third part is that is this issue of reflection and this loop of training. And I think that's what Ernest meant when he said that you have to have experience. Like, yes, I can observe your experience, but if I observe your experience, that's filtered through this list of, I perceive it and I filter through my knowledge, and I have to decide if it aligns with my values consciously or unconsciously, and then make a decision and goals. And this is often the case, especially if you have a tight-knit community where you have a similar emotional set of values and a similar perception of reality, in that case, passing on conceptual wisdom is extremely valuable and important. But outside of that, the only way to really gain the ability to act wisely, I think, is to actually go through this loop where you are training people, training them to see things, training them to have and understand the right concepts, and really, more importantly, training them to care. Like, I think a lot of what we do in formal education is really teaching people to obsess about certain things like timeliness, obedience, correctness. Like, all these things are deeply embedded in the reinforcement feedback loops that we create, because that is the kind of wisdom that we are trying to develop. The tragedy, of course, of formal education is that it trains you in a very specific context. Both, like, learning something in the classroom is very different than learning it on the job. In fact, our brains will context switch. Like, I can remember something if I'm sitting in a chair in a way that if I'm standing outside, I won't, because our brain does efficiently manage context, and not everything is easily accessible all the time. But more importantly, the whole sort of hierarchical structure of education is based on a certain idea of the nation state and civilization and office work from the 1950s that is not necessarily relevant to the context in which I have to act. And so it is kind of an open question, are there certain practices or skills that are generally applicable across contexts? And in that sense, that's what I'm trying to propose, maybe more as a protocol than necessarily, maybe even a meta-wisdom protocol. It is precisely this ability to reflect on where our goals, or actually not that, where our behavior doesn't produce the desired outcome, that is actually the heart of wisdom. And if we can cultivate disciplines and practices that in general enable us to do that, that is perhaps the highest wisdom. So maybe there's a hierarchy of conceptual wisdom, practical wisdom, and reflective wisdom. And that's basically what I wanted to say. So let me pause there and let Ernest sort of respond or summarize first.
Yeah, before responding, as we were talking about wisdom, and you touched on this thing that what you learn is in school versus what you learn in at work. So there's at work, there's a very productive person, and this person is supposed to train a new one, a newbie. So the training is great because the experienced person gave the trainee all the steps that needed to take in particular situations. So the trainee did that perfectly. But the trainee doesn't have wisdom. The trainee has knowledge, right? So as the trainee does the job, they might learn things. Okay, there's a new part or there's a new process. So what the other guy told me, it doesn't apply here. I need to do something different. So that's that person acquiring wisdom, because you have a lot of knowledge, but then you have a new situation, new context, new experience, whatever, and you have to modify what you learned. Now, before that was the newbie. What is it? What's the word used? Was the newbie wise in doing certain things, or does that person become wise as more different things come, and then he takes the right decisions? There will be another person who has the same training but doesn't take the wise decision because, I don't know, he had not as technical an education, or is more creative. So what I'm trying to get at is that wisdom kind of converts uh, as it goes from person to person. Like the trainee acquired a lot of knowledge that the trainer acquired through wisdom and through experience and all that stuff. But the trainee gets knowledge, right? It gets maybe a little experience if the trainer explained a lot of things, but normally the trainer doesn't have time to do that. He just, hey, do this because that, and forget about, don't think about why you do that, but why you just do it. And that's a lot of the training that you get. Press this button after 5 seconds. What happens if I don't? But you don't want to know. Just press the second, press the button after 5 seconds, period. Right? That's when, the people at Twitter, maybe when once Musk got there, they had to leave, hey, if you don't like me, go. Maybe they were the head of a department and they have to teach somebody what they know. They're not going to give them a whole lot of deep knowledge. They're just going to give them the superficial knowledge so they can do more or less what the person leaving could do. But as we saw, there's a lot of problems with Twitter now, X, that things that used to work well don't work. That's because the people in charge don't have as much wisdom as the people who are left, right?
Right. And I think what's interesting is that if I could just maybe make what I'm hearing you say more precisely is that the knowledge part of wisdom can fail the knowledge that is transferred could fail to produce wisdom in two different ways. One is that people hear it, they believe it, they apply it, but it only works in a very narrow context. And when that context shifts, then that wisdom becomes outdated, and then they're stuck because it's a very superficial wisdom. I like that term, superficial wisdom. The second way it can fail, which may also be common, is that the person who passes on the knowledge passes on to someone who doesn't have the same values and emotions. It's like, this is the right way to do that. And then Musk says, well, I don't care about that. I totally understand that. This is the thing that you want to do, but I have different goals, so I'm going to reject that knowledge. And, it was, whether or not that's a failure of wisdom, it's certainly a failure of wisdom transfer. And I think both of those are probably in evidence at Twitter. It's things that are rejected and things that were just so superficial that they didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, so my turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Two main remarks. The one is, well, I don't know how trivial it is, but I got very hung up on that word emotion, Ernie. It didn't, no doubt, emotion influences these things. But whether it is important in this model or important enough to be named, along with many other factors, I don't know. Would you like to explain why you put it there?
Sure. So this gets back to when I think about, so this is based on a model of human behavior that we talked about with ex-JEPA, right? Is that when there is a stimulus, could be internal or external, it has to be perceived, conceptualized, evaluated, and then decided on. And it's a somewhat radical and sort of anti-Platonic view of the world, but one I believe which has enormous amount of empirical evidence in its support. Is that there's a phrase, it's like in the Murphy's Law book. Under the most ideal circumstances, the organism will do whatever the hell it wants to do. And this idea of wanting and having conflicting wants is, I think, the reason for the vast majority of wisdom failures. Is that in my own personal life, sometimes it's a matter of not knowing what to do. Often it's a matter of not seeing what to do. But frankly, most of the time it's that I just don't want to, at least in that moment. And that idea of wanting, I am categorizing here as that there's something in the system that has a set of values, and that the way it communicates that is by adding emotional weights to the concepts and perception. And so what I'm hearing is that the word emotion in this context carries some emotional baggage for you that is making you feel uncomfortable. And that's good. That is a useful thing because there's probably a value you have that you feel might be threatened by this model. At least that's how I would look at it within this model. And I think those are actually the important questions of what is it that I value. And I think emotions are a very powerful, not completely accurate, but still powerful signal about what it is that I value.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I see, probably again, we should have defined emotion and decided whether this is a kind of intuition or automatic response from the body rather than a logical one. I think it needs more depth, put it that way. Now,
Sure.
it also seems like this emotional thing, whatever it is in potential conflict with the logical thing. Whereas the logical thing says do X and the emotional thing says I fear it, therefore I will not. So what I would like and recommend is a better definition and enrichment of how emotion fits into this. That's the first. That
right,
was
so let me clarify. So let me clarify what the model does say, because I think that's probably confusing. And let me see if I can clarify that point. Is that there's two different paths here. Because you talked about when there's conflict, right? Where it's like, oh, I think I should do this, but I want to do this, right? And to me, that's actually at the reflective level rather than the inference level. What I'm actually claiming, and this might be kind of radical, is that, but I found it to be painfully true in my own life, is that when I experience something, I automatically go through the inference loop. I perceive something, I conceptualize it, I have an emotional reaction, and then I make left brain logical decisions based on those assumptions. Like I had an email from a friend of mine that triggered me, that I saw him post on his blog. Actually, I saw a post on his blog that really kind of triggered me because it was part of a project we were on. I thought it was like a really almost sabotaging the thing I thought we were doing with the project. And so I said, like, and I really wanted to like call him out on it and say, like, dude, this is wrong. But I made the reflective choice to say, like, hey, I'm really struggling with this letter. And what I discovered was that he had mostly just sent this out as a private email to people he knows. He just posted on his blog as kind of a matter of habit. He didn't really think of this as a public document saying, this is what we're all about. He was saying, this is how I think about it for, you know, the context you guys are going in. And when that shifted my perception, it, you know, it slowly helped all the emotions leak out of it. And then I could I logically reframe the way that I saw what was going on. And so my basic premise of this model is that the automatic inference thing always happens. And that there's always an emotion, which is what allows us to make a decision. Computers, as far as I know, don't make decisions. They follow algorithmic rules, and that's the way it goes. Now, there are systems in the computer and in AI where people are trying to simulate these things, and I want to honor that. But a typical Turing automaton, deterministic, doesn't have the equivalent of emotion. It just skips right through to some forced algorithm. But when you have multiple values, the way that they color the decision is part of what drives our logical thinking. In fact, our axioms and our choices of what's real are driven by those emotional colors, social or otherwise. On the second level, though, in the mindfulness level, that we do perceive this conflict, like, oh, I think I should do this, but I want to do something else. And that's perceived as more of a red box kind of a thing, where there are these different layers that are in conflict. And I totally agree that that is underspecified. Our friend Daniel critiqued some of the ways I organize this. and it's very squishy and confusing, and I totally concede that point.
Okay, now I have my second concern. It is that this is I feel like this is as you know, a process description, and I didn't do a process description. I did I don't know.
You had a static, more of a static view of wisdom rather than a dynamic view, if that's a fair term.
Yeah, pretty close. I was trying to. I was emphasizing things like the multi-dimensionalness, the multi-conditions, and that's now. My first remark is that at every point here, every little box, those multiple qualities probably apply to it at every stage. And in other words, they are a way of analyzing what's really going on in this little box here. Okay. And I realize I'm just making a statement which may or may not hit you, and you say, yes, of course, that's right, or I'm not sure what
I think I lost.
at.
Sorry, I was trying to read something, and I think I missed what is the it that you're applying to each box?
The it is a multi-dimensional set of attributes like longevity, relevance, cultural fit. The ones I had in the list there.
The attributes of knowledge.
That the process model can get is relevant, and it can get enhanced by at each stage looking at let's call it the top 10 dimensions of the knowledge or wisdom. And what we could, if it were our project, we want to spend time on it, build a better model by combining the multi-dimensional quality model with the process model. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, some of those would probably apply across all boxes. Some of them you could probably look and say, oh yeah, that's really more a matter of perception. That's a matter of values. And these things. And I think there's a significant complementarity between the static and dynamic views of wisdom, right? There's a static thing to be analyzed versus a dynamic thing to be performed. And, how you draw the lines of what's knowledge and what's wisdom, what's skill, another term that's in there is kind of fuzzy.
Well, it could be worked on. And it can be worked on for years by many people, I'm sure.
Right. And but the thing that's more interesting,
the complementary is good.
Yeah. And I think the really interesting thing about this, and I think both of us ended up at the same place, was that context is really the key. Right? Is like having an abstract discussion of wisdom is of, marginal value. But being able to actually act wisely is important. And I guess to wrap up, here's a proposal, right? Because, this is the Datocracy podcast. And it is a question I've had is, how do we, this was actually going way back, my critique of your original proposal of Datocracy, which I thought was, brilliant and inspiring and visionary. It's like, well, it starts with, I send out a questionnaire to all the citizens, asking them a bunch of questions, right? Which is a reasonable place to start, but it's a fixed schema. That was the challenge I saw with that, is that I think these are the questions, these are the languages I'm using, this is the word I'm using, this is what are the things that I think is important. And to me, most of the problem that I think we have in our society is in our schemas. We have totally different schemas for what's important. We have different values, but even different schemas. We use the same word to mean very different things, sometimes innocently, sometimes perversely. And so that was where this idea of aggregation and AI and maybe experiences is important. And I think this is actually sort of my perspective of at a social level, what a system to promote Datocracy has to be able to do is not just the inference piece, but the reflective mindfulness piece at both a societal and individual level, helping us reprogram our schemas and our values so that our behavior is accomplishing our goals.
Sounds good.
And I also think that I guess this is a question I have for you, Tom, is looking at these issues of, one of the things that we mentioned was a, let me call it a tragedy, maybe that's too strong of a word, is that language is incredibly effective at doing what it does. And so many people who would benefit from it, either don't even try to understand it, or they understand it, but they never apply it. And the hypothesis is that the way that we change behavior is by training people to see the world differently, and that the way that they do that is by an emotional experience. Right? When we talk about like how the gay community would send these workers in to try and get people to vote in favor of gay marriage, and their primary mission was to try to understand where people were coming from, just make them feel heard and listened to, and understand their story and their feelings. And even without any argument, a lot of people would spontaneously change their positions just because they felt that emotional bond to someone who embodied certain values. And I always thought that's a really powerful challenge. Frankly, why I think that even though I'm a Christian and very conservative in my values, I actually think the gays deserved to win because they manifested practical wisdom and authentic relationships way better than the Christians did in that debate. And so I think that there is this practical side of it, political side of it, and having that context could be useful both broadly, but maybe even potentially in terms of helping people understand where language fits in and why it matters.
We're working on it in the background.
All right. So in terms of,
by the way, a little not exactly a commercial. There's an organization called the San Francisco Bay Area Business Agile Meetup. And they've invited me to hold a talk on the 21st of November. And that talk, the slides are already there in what I sent you. And it says San Francisco Bay Area thing. So, and it's
so you're physically coming here. You'll be in my neck of the woods.
No.
Oh, you're just doing it remote?
Not physically. But what it is they said, well, we've never really heard of language, but we want to hear about it. So if you like, that's just, the point is somebody decided that it's about time to hear more about it, put it that way.
So here's an offer. Feel free to say no. Would you be open to doing the same thing we did this time with your language talk, where you walk through it and we make sure we understand what you're trying to say, and then we have this discussion about, like, okay, considering the hypothesis that there's the knowledge component of language, but is there a perception and emotional component that, if you could find ways to incorporate that into your talk, would make it stickier?
I can do something like that. By the way, I have a separate paper in the list of books that I sent you now, right? And to not misspeak, I've got to just get my list up there. Somebody, you'll find a book called number 9, Happy: Human Aspects of Language Pleasing You. And you might like to take a peek at that, because somebody said, Tom, explain how your language influences emotions and feelings and all that shit. So I wrote a whole book about it. Take a look and tell me what you want next time.
Okay, so how about that? So I will take the action item to read the book. And then, did you want to take the action item to see if you can add some perception and emotional aspects to your talk, or should we just look at the talk as it is and give you feedback?
Well, again, I have
next time
2 talks now. I have one talk about language, but I have the book about the emotional aspects of language. And it sounded like you really wanted the second one, not the first one.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm really curious is how much the second one, the emotional aspects, is influencing your talk.
Again, in 5 minutes, you can scan the books and say, that's the one I want. And you tell me, and I'll do it. The answer is yes.
Books, and I will send you. I will read both books and send you an email and propose a topic for next time. So, Fathom
Yeah.
should capture that, and I'll put it in the thread.
With thought. And Bruce,
Right.
Ernest can do the same thing if he likes. Take a peek at the books and give your feedback.
You open
Okay.
to skimming those books and providing feedback?
You talking to me?
Great. Yeah, Ernest.
Second.
Yeah, I'll try and send out an email with it. The idea was that we'll send out those links to those two books, and we'll look at them and suggest things we want to discuss next time around that. And then October, I think we can meet at our usual time. After that, it gets into the holidays. We may have to take a break. We'll see, or shift our schedule around. But thank you, gentlemen. This has been a blast. I feel wiser. We'll see if I act wise.